Welcome to our study of Treasury of Precious Qualities by Omniscient Jigme Lingpa. And as always, we want to approach this study with an understanding how this actually holds the key to getting to the bottom of suffering universally. And this we call preparing with bodhicitta. This usually accompanies two other aspects of the way to engage with either study or practice. And the second is what we call the main part without reference point. And that is, as we're engaging in the practice, we do so without essentially distraction. When we do meditation, it in a way has more to do with the vipassana of sustaining a condition of non-confusion. But here, when we're studying, it really just means to remain focused. And then we conclude with dedication, as you know. So in this way, we begin the practice with this really important aspect of preparing with the attitude of bodhicitta, wishing to engage in this with the intention to establish all beings at the level of perfect omniscience, perfect enlightenment. So we'll begin with invoking Omniscient Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind termers, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So in case you're wondering, this is the beginning of the circuit around Mount Kailash, the Mount Kailash circumambulation. So we've come to verse 8, where Jigme Lingpa writes, some have senses that belie their promise. Though they meet with teachers holy and sublime, they hear their words like echoes sounding from a cliff and suffer in the wasteland of no understanding. So even though we might have all the gifts, even though we might meet the teachers, and yet somehow they just don't penetrate. And as a consequence, suffering continues. So Kyabje Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, those whose faculties are impaired, who lack, for instance, the ability to speak, and especially those who are mentally handicapped, may encounter a spiritual guide who is on the supreme level of accomplishment, and they may even hear his or her teaching. But what is said is unintelligible to them, like the booming of an echo. The sense of the teaching is lost on them, and they fail to grasp the vital point of what actions are to be adopted and what should be forsaken. Thus their fortune is marred, and they suffer greatly in this desolate and fearful wasteland of samsara. So this, of course, doesn't mean that these are lesser persons, but they just don't have the capacity to absorb and apply the teachings that they might hear. So they're born as a human, and yet they lack the necessary faculties. So yet being born a human, we would say their fortune is marred. And as a consequence also, they're not able to extract themselves from the condition of samsara. This, of course, doesn't mean that there's no value for them to encounter great teachers. They just don't be what they. Of course, there's differing degrees. I could actually even qualify as part of this, having, you could say, not perfect intelligence, but at the same time, there is presumably sufficient intelligence in many of us to at least be able to benefit to some extent. But for persons who might not be able to really make any sense of the words, then there is nevertheless great value in meeting great beings. And that's also where we would say so much of the quality of the teacher lies beyond the words and actually in what we call their blessing. So the mere presence of meeting somebody like the Dalai Lama, even though one might not be able to intellectually appreciate the teaching, there's so much value for anybody, persons, and so forth. I mean, anybody, anybody who's might be intellectually impaired. And then verse 9 reads, "Some achieve the great ship of a human life, with wits like sails, wherewith to cross the ocean of rebirth. But overwhelmed by demons, they espouse false views, wherein the Buddha who has come takes no delight." So this is for those who actually are completely aware with their complete wits intact, and yet due to great misfortune, then this intelligence is hooked up with what we call wrong views. You could say essentially flawed science, having a little bit from the Buddhist point of view, it's a bit like sort of those that believe in the flat earth theory. And with all respects to people who believe in that, it seems a little bit difficult to you could say, to justify. And so similarly also, the predicament of particularly modern people is very much this, that despite having great intelligence, there's nevertheless this pervasive view that, particularly in the modern world, then the materialistic view, in which there's simply no understanding of what consciousness actually is and the nature of consciousness. And as such, there's not really an understanding of neither enlightenment, past lives, future lives, the law of karma, and so forth. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, "To be born in samsara through the effect of karma and defilements is like being adrift upon a vast ocean, unfathomable and shoreless. To obtain a human form is like having a great boat with which to cross this ocean and reach the land of liberation. But though people may possess all their faculties, and though they may have intelligence, like a sail to propel them in the direction of freedom, this excellent support is wasted when the mind is clouded by false beliefs. As a result, such people fail to enter the Dharma and do not undertake the path to liberation so pleasing to the Buddha who appeared in this world to set it forth. Denying the karmic principle of cause and effect and claiming that there is no afterlife and so forth, they are beset by demons, hindering them from the path of liberation. They fall under their power and lose their freedom." So such persons fall under the power then of this condition of essentially Mara, or the demons that prevent any degree with which they could move towards liberation. And that, of course, is then the condition very much in the case of the modern person. And of course, within Tibet and in Buddhist cultures, it would seem very odd that there would be such people that would, deny the only two obvious. You could say in the modern world, people are very innocent in this sense. So where in Tibet you'd have to be really an odd person to not really gauge the value of the Buddhist teaching. But of course, in the modern world, this is very different. And as such, there's not as if there is any kind of normalcy around the pursuit of the path to liberation and so forth. But nevertheless, it does apply that the sad situation is that there are persons possessing the human rebirth, possessing perfect intelligence, and yet unable really to make sense of the Buddhist teaching, and only very rarely even encountering it. So then verse 10 reads, "Some fall in blind and lightless chasms, ages where no Buddhas manifest. And though they try to rise, they find no path, and in despair sink down from low to lower destinies." So this is where there's not even the presence of a Buddha in this world. So you might be a seeker, and yet there's nothing that can be found. You're essentially left without any hope. And this is very often also the condition within the modern world, that you seek and there's nothing on the horizon really that really provides a vision. There's nothing that seems reliable, nothing that seems to be a proper refuge. So to take, but of course here we're talking about something very different, which is then at the time when there is what we call a dark kalpa, in which there is no Buddha. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, to take a human birth during a dark kalpa is once again of no avail. For these are periods when the light of Dharma does not shine, when no Buddhas appear in the world from the time of its formation until its destruction. To take such a birth is to be like a man who has fallen into a pitch dark crevice and has broken his legs. However much he tries to get out, he can neither see the way nor even move, for his legs are shattered. In just the same way, without the light of the path of freedom, people are unaware of the three trainings that could lead them to liberation. The three trainings then being Shila, discipline, Samadhi, meditation, and Prajna, wisdom. We would say, when we talk about the Buddhist path, we very often sum the entire Buddhist path up in terms of these three trainings: discipline, Samadhi, or meditation, and wisdom, Prajna. And so, unaware of these conditions that could lead them to liberation, Kangyur Rinpoche continues, they constantly pursue false paths because of their ignorance and defilements. So they're ignorant in the sense of just not knowing. So in the way that they are completely innocent. When we say defilements here, we simply mean the kleshas that are the natural expression of ignorance. The natural condition of ignorance is the sense of me and the duality between self and others. And on the basis of that, we have likes, dislikes, and we have all the kleshas, and with that also all the karmic patterns. So someone like that without a path are simply just bound by this condition of ignorance and defilements. So such persons, Kangyur Rinpoche says, not only have they fallen into a dreadful place from which they cannot escape, but by degrees they fall deeper and deeper from the states of animals and pretas down into the infernal realms. The freedom to practice Dharma is totally absent. So you can say the pedagogy of reflecting on the extraordinary conditions of the precious human rebirth is very much linked up with appreciating that presently we have an enormous opportunity. But it is also very much linked up with understanding how, in the absence of this opportunity that we presently have, it doesn't look very good. And so this is not about, you could say, manipulating or making anybody frightened, but it's simply just becoming aware of what an extraordinary circumstance we have right now. So we sometimes would naively think that we encounter the spiritual path, then everybody's going to talk about nirvana. Everybody's going to talk about love. They're going to talk about light. They talk about sort of spiritual bliss and so on. And that, of course, is implicit in enlightenment. It's implicit in the spiritual path, but it's not on the premise of ego. It's not on the premise of our expectations. And from that point of view, then the Buddha are looking at sentient beings who are profoundly stuck in suffering. And that's where the Buddha, just like a doctor, doesn't sit and say, gosh, you poor patient, you know, I feel so good. I have a wonderful life. I have it so blissfully. That doesn't really help much, except the patients could perhaps begin to sort of have some adoration for the doctor. And in some sense, of course, faith is justified if your doctor is healthy, for sure. But at the same time, the doctor's interaction with the patient, which would primarily being attentive to how the condition of the condition of the patient, would be concerned about how is the patient actually doing. And so the Buddha, on attaining enlightenment, the Buddha started off teaching the Four Noble Truths, beginning to talk about suffering. And you might think, isn't that odd marketing? But in fact, it is very compassionate, talking about the condition of those to whom the Buddha is addressing. Of course, we can look to the Buddha and we can look to the teacher and so forth, and we can see extraordinary qualities. But it's important that we don't just objectify and externalize enlightenment as sort of just the teacher being there and wonderful, and we're so not wonderful and we're so suffering. Rather, the teacher's point is we could be well. There's no reason why we shouldn't know what the teacher knows. There's no reason why we shouldn't be well, just like the doctor is well. And so the Buddha's first teaching is suffering, because we are suffering. And so the Buddha also is saying, right now in the condition of samsara, to have this extraordinary opportunity of having been born a human, it's necessary that we don't just take it for granted. And more than in Buddhist cultures, really the modern individual actually is lulled into some sense that, well, as humans, that's all there is. There's obviously animals and other beings, but apart from that, just being a human is normal. And that's where the point here is, it's not normal. It's extraordinarily fortunate. Winning in the lottery doesn't even qualify as an example. It's way beyond that. So that's where we appreciate what we have, and also so appreciate the condition that we need to address. So these four reflections that the practice of the path begins with, then they are very much about us, you could say, sobering up and becoming aware that we have a situation here. Something can be done, but it's important we do it now. So in the 11th stanza or verse, then, Jigme Lingpa writes, 8 states, therefore, where beings are not free to practice Dharma, where world-destroying gales of sin and suffering rage, where merit is defiled in weariness and fear. Oh, think of this and profit from your freedom. So we've here discussed these 8 states where there's not freedom. And as such, within these conditions, then neurosis, negative action, confused action, and as a result, suffering is just everywhere. And it's in this condition, there's also lack of actually understanding what would constructive action be. And so that's where we perpetuate our own suffering. And not knowing what to do, continually suffering, then there's just exhaustion, there's fear, and so forth. And that's the point here, is again not about doom and gloom, but it's about right now appreciating the opportunity. So Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, in all such terrible circumstances in which evil actions bring forth their results in manifold suffering, whirling like the all-destroying hurricane at the end of time, the body is worn away with pain, and fear is the natural condition of the mind. Beings indulge negative habits. They turn their backs on the sacred teaching. Thus, we are advised to reflect again and again on how we might avoid being born in the 8 conditions in which there is no freedom to practice the Dharma. So remember, we talk about the 8 freedoms, and then we're going to look at the 8 advantages, leisures, and so on. We talk about them differently, but there's 10 of them. So these 8 that we have presently looked at, beginning with the gods who live for a long time and so forth, then appreciating this, we reflect how that we have an extraordinary fortune. Jigme Lingpa calls on us, Kangyur Rinpoche writes, to follow the path of liberation with diligence, so that by relying on the teacher and his profound instructions, we might make meaningful the opportunity that we now possess. So that concludes the first section of these 18, which are what we call the 8 freedoms. Dalwa Gye. Five individual and 5 circumstantial advantages. Sometimes in translations you will see this translated as the 5 advantages that depend on ourselves and the 5 advantages that depend on other. But other there really means circumstances, external circumstances. So stanza 12 then reads, to be a human being in a pure land, in a pure and central land, with limbs and senses whole, with faith in Buddha's teaching, with karmic fortune blossoming, unmarred by evil deeds. All this is like the wishing tree, extremely rare. So then, appreciating then these advantageous circumstances or conditions that we have, Kangyur Rinpoche comments, to have taken birth in a central land where the Buddha, where the Dharma is proclaimed, is like being a sapling planted in pure soil. To have fully functioning sense faculties and healthy limbs, and thus have the basis for the reception, meditation, and practice of the teachings, is to be like a healthy tree in leaf and branch, to have confidence in the doctrine of the victorious one, to have the karma of one's body, speech, and mind in perfect flower, undamaged by the hail of evil actions contrary to the Dharma, sins of immediate effect, and false views concerning the 3 jewels. So that's very much what gets in the way. Sins of immediate effect are those sins that are so, you could say, negative that they actually, without a bardo, we have sort of just right away take an inferior rebirth. And then there's also the worst, really, of all the 10 negative actions is the false views concerning the 3 jewels, not understanding how the Buddha has understood the truth, how the Buddha has understood the nature of reality, and as such, how the teaching serves to set us free, and how the companions on the path then constitute a refuge. So without these, then, we are as someone that is sort of in the middle of a hail of negative circumstances. So right now, then, we have then this extraordinary fortune to have confidence in the Buddha's teaching and to have our body, speech, and mind able to practice the Dharma and not be caught by these negative conditions. So that's what we have there. And also to have been born a human being able to uphold the Dharma and acquire the qualities of liberation. And we have that. There's absolutely no reason that we shouldn't be able to acquire and integrate the qualities of liberation. All this is like a miraculous, wish-fulfilling tree. It is exceedingly rare and significant. And to put these 5 individual advantages to good effect is of the highest importance. So we're given this, presently, on the basis of our merit and so forth, we possess these circumstances that have to do with our own situation. 13 then speaks about the circumstances external to us, so to speak. But rarer still, the Buddha, like an Udambara, has appeared within our world. The flower of the Dharma is in bloom. The garden of the doctrine, undiminished, still exists, and perfectly do holy beings enter it, within whose cooling shade we may find rest. So to be born at a time when there is a Buddha who's come into the world, like we saw just before, is extremely rare. The Udambara is supposedly this great blue flower that blossoms very rarely. So it's regarded as something absolutely extraordinary. And so with this condition of the Buddha coming into this world, the Dharma being there, the doctrine is still there, and there are persons that have fully understood the nature of the doctrine and who actually serve to provide us with the teaching. And as such, we would say, within the cooling shade of these individuals, we may find rest. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, the fact that a Buddha has appeared in our world, an occurrence that is as rare as the flowering of the Udambara. See how rare it is. Yeah, there you go. The Udambara flower is said to blossom only once in a kalpa. So the fact that he proclaimed the doctrine and that the three turnings of the Dharma wheel have blossomed into flower, the fact that through explanation and practice, this doctrine in both transmission and realization still exists in our day without decline. The fact that there are still teachers who have perfectly embraced the Dharma, and finally, the fact that we have been welcomed into the cool shade of a virtuous friend, a perfect guide on the path to liberation. These five circumstantial advantages are even rarer than the five individual ones. So that is then the coming of the Buddha. And when we talk about the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma, which is one way to define the entire Buddhist doctrine, this speaks about the three turnings of the wheel as the teachings on the first turning of the wheel, which are the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, dependent arising, karma, the law of karma, and so forth. The second is the teaching on the lack of inherent existence in all phenomena, the ungraspability of all phenomena, that nothing actually possesses any inherent nature. So that, you could say, is completely contrary to the way we ordinarily perceive both ourselves and the phenomenal world, as where we ordinarily see things as solid. The second turning of the wheel is the teaching on shunyata, the emptiness. And with that emptiness, then, there's the setting free the mind from the great delusion that we have suffered. And from that, then, the natural expression of that is great compassion. So really, the second turning of the wheel really becomes the foundation of the Mahayana vehicle. The third turning of the wheel is then that this nature of emptiness is not just a blank emptiness, but is that place in which the original ground, the luminosity of the ground that has been veiled by our cognitive obscuration, on the basis of the first two turnings, the first two turnings of the wheel and the realization of emptiness, then the natural quality of enlightenment manifests. This is where we speak about Buddha nature as becoming fully manifest. So these are ways in which we define the turnings of the wheel, or the Buddhist doctrine. And this teaching then continues down to the present day. We have this teaching not just as a set of scriptures, but also as a living tradition. So the scriptures we would refer to in terms of the transmission and the realization, those individuals that have realized the intention of the Buddha. So this, we can look to this present day and we can see, yes, the Buddha's teaching is still present in terms of the transmission of all the Buddha's words, and also the great beings, great bodhisattvas that still manifest and teach. And this is then the fourth point, which is then that there are these teachers. The teaching still exists, the teaching of transmission and realization. The teachers are there, and also we have encountered these teachers. These are great bodhisattvas. They haven't just gone to the mountains and said, goodbye world, I'm off, I'm out of here. They actually manifest within this world and assist and look and tend to and care for sentient beings. So that's where we find ourselves as students of the teachers, having found this cool shade of a virtuous friend. And this is then extremely rare. Let's see if there's some questions. When we are aware that we suffer, practicing Dharma should be taken as a remedy. So we do take space of practicing in our mind. Yes, it's on the basis of this very important realization that we suffer. And this we sometimes would say, because we're very often very jaded and thick-skinned, we might not realize that we're suffering. We say the sufferings of the condition of a sentient being, which is this delusional condition of duality, of fundamental ignorance, that usually doesn't bother sentient beings, most sentient beings. It's like having a hair, we would say it's like a hair in the palm of your hand. But for somebody who really begins to be sensitive to the Dharma, we would say it's a bit like as if there's a hair in their eye. And that's why it's enormously annoying. And so for those who practice the Dharma and for those who then begin to practice the path, then this condition of ignorance becomes something that very much is something that pains us. And that's why we then determine to practice the path. And this becomes the main concern of someone who then is aware of the suffering, the cause, and the need to practice the Dharma. I feel the textbook is the same as the ritual text in Ngundruga. Well, this is a commentary which very much goes with Buddhist practice. And as such, it in for example, the Longchen Nyingtik Ngundro, also the Chetsun Nyingtik Ngundro, and the various Ngundros, they all work with these contemplations. These are contemplations that are basic to the practice of the path. So yes, just like also when we studied finding rest in the nature of the mind, these are, you could say, the essential reflections of the gradual path. So the rarity of a precious human existence. So stanzas 14 and 15. Such fortune in ourselves is rarer than the wishing tree. Such outer circumstances are like Udambara flowers. These 10 together, joined with eightfold leisure, such coincidence will scarce be found again. Examples make this clear. The turtle's head, the floating yoke, and numbers also, whereby humans in comparison with beasts are like the stars that shine by day compared with those by night, with, in a like proportion, hungry ghosts and denizens of hell. So again, we want to appreciate the 18 conditions that we presently have, the 18 leisures or the freedoms, and the 10 circumstances. So that's where we have presently an extraordinary coming together of all the right circumstances. And then we also we then meditate on how rare this is. So we're going to look at some illustrations that intend to make us realize, because it's very difficult, particularly for us in the modern world, where there's, you could say, we're surrounded by discourse, sort of a din of influence that continually tells us, something absolutely different. To just be born a human is sort of like, it's just there. Whereas what we're saying here is, no, it's not just there, it's extremely rare. And there's sort of a childish ignorance about how extraordinarily fortunate we are. Just like people who are very wealthy, who might not even be aware that there's people who suffer poverty, hunger, and so forth. So that's where we actually meditate on this. And like somebody was just saying, this is also part of the preliminary practices. I mean, basically, when we practice the Nundro, we are actually engaging in the application of what we're studying here. So this completely comes together with the practice of Nundro. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, why is it so necessary to tread the path with diligence and without delay? As we have said, the 5 individual advantages are as rare as the wish-fulfilling tree, while the 5 circumstantial advantages are like the Udambara flower, even rarer than the earlier 5. These 10, taken together, form the special characteristics, and the 8 freedoms form the basis of what we call a precious human existence. So this is where we are, extraordinarily fortunate. And so the footnote here reads, this traditional scheme of 8 freedoms, Dalwa Gye, and 10 advantages, Rangshin Jorchu, is supplemented in the writings of Longchenpa by 2 further lists of hindering factors, each containing 8 items, which must be absent if human existence is to be considered truly precious. These are taken up and commented on by Paltra Rinpoche in the words of my perfect teacher. And this, incidentally, also, if you're practicing the Longchen Nyingtik Ngundro, there is the practice of calling the Guru, in which we actually ponder these 18 freedoms and advantages. And in there also, this is Jigme Lingpa then sums up these points from Longchenpa. So the note continues. First, there are 8 obstructive circumstances. Cheljung Kien Mikom Nampa Gye, that prevents true practice of the Dharma. These are great strength of the 5 negative emotions, great stupidity, the following of a false teacher, great indolence, strong obscuration arising from past negativity, a lack of independence, embracing Dharma for the sake of protection from worldly fears, and attempting to acquire wealth and prestige from a show of Dharma practice. So that's the first 8, the obstructive circumstances. Then second, there are 8 incompatible tendencies. Riche Lui Mikom Nampa Gye. These are being caught up in worldly activities, a lack of basic humanity, complacency with regards to the ills of samsara, a lack of faith in the teacher and the teachings, finding entertainment in what are negative actions, a lack of interest in spiritual values, the transgression of the Pratimoksha vows, the monastic ordination, and the Bodhisattva vows, and the breach of Tantric Samaya. If any of these factors is present, the level of precious human existence has not been fully attained. So again, there's both these obstructive circumstances and then the incompatible tendencies. So these we add to the reflection according to Longchenpa. 16. Oh, wait a minute. No, sorry. We've only just begun. Okay. So Kyabje Kangyur Rinpoche says, if we do not take advantage of it now, an opportunity such as this will not be found again. The reason for saying this may be illustrated with examples. One could imagine, for instance, an ocean, vast as the 3,000-fold universe. In the depth of this ocean lives a blind turtle that rises to the surface only once every century. To attain a human birth is rarer than the chance occurrence of the turtle surfacing to find his head inside a yolk, drifting at random on the water's surface. Or again, one could suggest the difficulty of attaining a precious human existence by using numerical illustrations. Compared with the number of beings in the animal kingdom, humans are like stars seen during the day as compared with stars seen at night. Okay, this we can actually do. First of all, the example with the turtle that surfaces every century once, where to actually, as it surfaces, to then stick its head through this yolk being this piece of wood that you normally would sort of carry water with, right? You're probably familiar with that. And it's this piece of wood that has a sort of an opening. But for the turtle to stick its head through that, we can try and ponder. This is incredibly rare. It's one of these things that we ponder that it's almost like we begin to get heart palpitations. It's that rare. And similarly then also the rarity is illustrated with, if we look at the animal kingdom, because we, sometimes people actually they say, how can rebirth be taking place? Because there's more and more humans coming. Well, the humans just constitute a small little fraction of sentient beings, and we can be born anywhere. That there presently is a few more humans, well, that's a good thing, except, let's hope they all gain precious human rebirth. But we can see humans, how few humans there are, just compared to the animals. If we look at the animals, if we look at the insects, if we look at living creatures, the birds and so on, they far outnumber humans to the degree here that, like we say, they are like the stars at night compared to the humans being like the stars at day. And so similarly also, the animals, there's not so many animals compared then to the pretas. Pretas, there are way more pretas than animals. And again, there's way more denizens of the realms of hell than there are pretas. So that's why we could say that as far as samsara goes, if we sort of had to have it like a big triangle, we could say predominantly the hells occupy most of samsara. Then there are pretas, then there's some animals, and then there's a few humans. And even though we might be, I don't know how many billion we are by now, but anyway, the number of humans is nothing compared to the animals, and that's nothing compared to the pretas, and that's nothing compared to the denizens of the realms of hell. So stanza 16 then reads, if once aboard this great ship of our freedom, we now fail to reach the far shore of this sea of pain, this meeting with the helmsman will indeed have been in vain for us who strive and fare upon the Dharma's path. So now is the opportunity. This is really the an extremely rare chance to be free from this extremely painful condition. So that's where we are encouraged to really not waste this precious opportunity. Kangyur Rinpoche says, this precious human existence is the most rare and extremely meaningful. If those who journey on the pathways of the Dharma with liberation as their goal, who have now in their possession the great ship of freedom and advantage, and who have met with a holy teacher, who is the guide, and, as it were, the navigator of such a ship, if such people fail to cross the ocean of the boundless and unfathomable sufferings of samsara to the dry land of liberation, their opportunity will have been completely squandered. All this should be a subject of reflection and a spur to greater exertion. So this is the purpose of this, understanding that we have this fortune, we should make the most of it. Okay, I think we'll stop here today, and if you have any questions. Hello, I'm wondering why it's said that if we don't take advantage of the precious human birth, now we won't get a second chance again. Does this mean once one is born a human, then one is not born a human again in all subsequent rebirths? No. As you just looked here, the example of being born a human is just so extremely rare. Of course, what we're doing on the path is creating the conditions, the good conditions. We're creating the merit, the circumstances. We're being proactive in creating circumstances that will enable us to, in the next life, connect with the Dharma. So, of course, we talk about how we, now being on the path, we have this extraordinary circumstance, and then as we're on the path, then within a number of lifetimes, it should be possible for us to attain liberation. But it's dependent. The thing is, there's not a kind, merciful sort of magician who's going to make all of this just happen for us just because we're, you know, we're nice Buddhists and we've taken refuge and we've done all the right things. It's about us actually conditioning ourselves. And that's where we need to have this sense of urgency that we have right now, something extraordinary. As we're practicing the Dharma, we aspire to have these circumstances in the future, and we put down the conditions. But on the other hand, we also don't know what karma we have. So that's why right now everything is looking good, but we really don't know what kind of karma we have. So that's the point. So the point really is just to appreciate it. And we sometimes do say this thing, which means on this one occasion of having a human rebirth. But it really just means that it's just exceedingly rare, as we've just seen. How can I facilitate animals' future birth into human realms? Mantras, continually, you could say, surrounding the animal with Dharma. You know, having your animal there when you practice, whispering mantras, and as much as you can, just also praying for the animal. So there's this sort of, you could say, bond that's created, and that bond will, enable us to bring to connect with the animal, and through us, the animal can connect with the Dharma, and possibly also, possibly connect with the Dharma even, independent of us. So there's a lot we can do in terms of surrounding the animal with the right sort of dharmic circumstances. I sort of find it hard to emotionally reconcile the theme. Hold on. Emotionally reconcile the theme of spurring myself to exert and strive against the other theme of spiritual materialism. Would this seeming contradiction resolve through further practice and right motivation? Absolutely. That's a little bit of an overcomplication. It's not about us in any way endorsing, or how do you say, indulging ego when we practice with that sense of, you could say, determination. The determination to be free from samsara, which is the point of this, it actually has nothing to do with the agenda of ego. The ego doesn't really want to practice the path altogether. The ego would like to have all the, you could say, the credentials or the accolades, and essentially the sort of the sense of accomplishment that comes essentially as a reward for just just for being somebody. And the Dharma doesn't operate at all on this sort of agenda of ambition and so forth. So that's where the determination to be free from samsara is not at all on the premise of ego. And so us practicing with this determination to be free is certainly an antidote to spiritual materialism. It's very much about not giving ego an inch, if you like. There's nothing in the path that really, there's nothing about the path that indulges ego. So the sort of notion of spiritual and the awareness of spiritual materialism is very important. But once we're practicing, if we're practicing, then we are actually, by practicing, implicitly undermining spiritual materialism. Spiritual materialism more has to do when we're not practicing. It's more sort of on the level of generating a motivation where the path is construed as something that would make us, more powerful on the premise of ego. Dedication of merit of our own good deeds. Exactly. Yeah. Dedication of merits, prayers, and so forth. Yes, very much. Nowadays, we say animals are much less than ages ago because humans have killed so many species. Well, yes, that's some species, but there's still quite a few insects. But you're right. Many bird species are dying out, but there's also many other animals then that are flourishing. There's and of course an imbalance that we're very aware of within ecology, but there's still a lot of animals. Just think how many insects there is just in you could say a little hill. If most people just if most people just constant to rebirth in the 6 realms, then the total number might be the same. Then if animals are becoming less and less, does it mean there's more and more humans in the world in the past years? Statistics shows that humans are increasing. Well, that's what I was talking about before. Yeah, that's obviously not the case. Just like to say, I'm very grateful for your practice and experience and willingness and ability to teach, and in English. It does make a difference. I just realized. May the teachings in English flourish. Well, we have some. I remember my friend, my friend Eric Pema once talked to Kangyur Rinpoche about the. Oh no, that wasn't Eric. It was actually myself. But I was saying to no, that's not true. What was it again? No, because we were talking about how what you're saying here. There's so few teachings in English, and well, remember when I asked Kangyur Rinpoche, he was just saying, well, the essential teachings are translated. They can be translated. So that's a comfort, right? But then also remember Eric was also talking about this, and Kangyur Rinpoche, or was it maybe Chuchu Rinpoche, I can't remember, said anyway, you know, that there are great sublime beings who are teaching in English. And for example, Chögyam Trungpa. And I cannot say, we cannot overestimate the kindness of Chögyam Trungpa to the modern world in terms of taking really the most subtle aspects of the path and really clarifying them. So, so we have some very great, and so also we have some very good translators. You know, nowadays there's some very good translation groups, Nalanda, Dharmachakra, Padmakara, and so forth. Now, following the question about being only born once as a human, or is that the fact? Could you please talk about how the teachings explain the fact that having such a rare human birth, there are so many horrible human beings. How could they have obtained such precious gift of being born a human? Well, you know, this is all about causes and conditions. And so presently, yes, it's like some people, they are terrible. Some people inherit a lot of money and they just use it terribly. And some people just have very little money and they use it very wisely. And so people are born with all sorts of different circumstances. So there might be the good karma to be born as a human, and yet the qualities that we're highlighting here are entirely absent. So that's just, this is the nature of the countless manifestations that we have within the samsara, the countless styles of karma. Yeah. I dedicate my prayers to have a right condition for all sentient beings, to have the right conditions to realize absolute truth or emptiness or enlightenment. Is this right? Yes. You know, at the end of this study session, we chant these 3 times 4 lines from Kunchen Longchen Rabjam. And Kiwa Gangi Angdu Kiwa Tamchidu Toriant and Dundan Topper Show. You know, when we chant that, there's actually 3 sets of 4 lines, then that is exactly what we actually are aspiring to. That we might be have all the circumstances and meet teachers and so on. Also, we wish this for all sentient beings. Okay, now somebody just is bringing up some further data with regards to how many insects there are. Thank you. 10 quintillion insects, apparently. Okay, so we have billion, trillion, I guess we have quadrillion, and then we have quintillion. And so we have 10 quintillions. That's a lot of zeros on that one. So there you can see humans are just like a tiny part. In my next life, is it possible to be reborn back in the Buddha's time? Or I have to be reborn in this degenerated time? Well, you know, because of our karmic condition and our shared karmic perception, we're actually stuck within time. You could say in the absolute, time and space is relative. And we would also say, and this is good news for you who are practicing the path, in the absolute sphere of reality, the conditions of time and space, as we ordinarily constructed in our confusion, is absent. And as such, you could say, we say all the Buddhas are there, all the Buddhas of the 10 directions, all the objects of refuge, they're completely present within that nature. And this nature abides within our own disposition. So you needn't actually long for a different time. But that's also why we pray for rebirth in, for example, the pure realm of Sukhavati or the pure realm of the copper-colored mountain and so forth. That we might actually encounter the Buddha. We needn't think of it as being something that where we have to go back in time, like what is it, Back to the Future and these kind of things, you know. So true regarding teachings in English, but we also need people who understand the Western mentality. Okay, well, we're counting on you. There will be this of course is taking place. You know, when you think of the teaching how it evolved in Tibet, it took actually several hundred years before the teaching actually took root. So let's all be part of that movement. Okay. All right. Next time we'll we'll continue with chapter 2, chapter on impermanence, if I'm not wrong. So we'll conclude with this this prayer. And even though Longchen Pahi writes through all our births, and of course we are saying then wherever I'm born and so forth, we also really wish this for all sentient beings, that all beings might be endowed with these qualities. But you certainly have many prayers that are very particular, very clear about that. For example, the Sangche Manam, the prayer of excellent conduct, also really makes these vast bodhisattva prayers that all sentient beings may have the circumstances to encounter the teaching. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. So somebody's asking about holiday time. No, I'm actually on retreat. This is the only time that I've included you all in my boundaries. So I'll be continuing this even though I'm in retreat. But yeah, so it will, this will continue throughout, the holidays and so on. So I hope I'm not disturbing your holidays by offering this. Okay, by the way, wishing you all the very best for, it'll have been Christmas by the time we see each other next time. So wishing you a Merry Christmas. Okay, see you soon. Okay.